Welcome to datacenterHawk Podcast 26. Today we're talking about Q1 2020. We're getting ready to release our Q1 2020 insight results. David, how are you doing this morning?
Doing great. Excited to talk about the first quarter.
I know you and the team have been hard at work getting ready for this. So today we're going to talk about results for Q1 2020. All right, Dave, welcome. Today is April 15th, tax day, although I think that date has been pushed back a little bit for COVID reasons, I think to July. How have you been doing the last couple of weeks since we talked?
Been great. Yeah, I mean, we've transitioned well to working from home as everybody can see here. So we're doing great. We got plenty to do. I mean, I think that's the exciting thing about the data center industry is in the midst of, everything that's been going on, certainly sensitive to other industries that are challenged and struggling, but there's a lot of activity, a lot of things taking place. What's happened has impacted, the data center industry significantly in a lot of good ways. And we're going to talk about some of those today.
Let me ask you this before we get started. What are you most looking forward to doing once the shelter in place is lifted?
Yeah, the good thing about this, probably for most people, I think, is it makes you appreciate a lot of things you take for granted, right? So I think we would, in the Liggett home, probably be most excited about just being able to go out to eat, and I know seems pretty simple, but it certainly is something that, is a fun thing to do and something that we miss doing, just being able to get out and go grab a bite to eat somewhere. So what about you?
That was the first thing I thought of as well. And here in Dallas, we've got a relatively short patio season.
Yeah.
So there's, It goes from being cold like it is today to scalding hot in just a matter of weeks typically. Yep. So, it's kind of unfortunate that we're losing the best part of the year to go, like you said, go eat outside, be outside, find a patio of some sort, just enjoy the pretty weather. And that can be, even outside our own house, but also, different restaurants around.
Now, I will say we spent a lot of time outside, which has been awesome. And that's something I've really enjoyed is we probably walked more, as a family, or my wife and I, than we ever have, which has been really fun. And, and as you mentioned, this for Dallas, if you're from where we are, this is the time to do it, because in about 30 days it will be on the warmer side, and not make sense to do that unless you want to work out and do like a little sweat sesh, Mike, which I know you love. So
man, it is, the outdoor exercise climate has been beautiful in the 40s and 50s. It's great running temperature. So
that's right.
Yeah, hopefully we get out and about before it's way too hot.
That's right. Come on.
All right, so today we want to talk about, again, just for folks who aren't aware of it, our insight is our quarterly release of information on the data center markets in North America and Europe. And so again, that's something you're very closely working on with the research team, David. So we talk about, again, the capacity of a given market, the size of a market, how that market has been growing in the last quarter, and really historically as well. Talk a lot about the supply and demand in a given market. What is the pricing doing? And really spend, again, a lot of time researching what is going on in the market and helping people, data center professionals, understand, get their arms around a market. So again, just talk briefly what the research team does. David, there's been some unique challenges in gathering that information this quarter. So we'd love to just hear from you about how that's impacted the team. What has the process been like this quarter to gather that information and get it to the point we're ready to publish it?
Yeah, it's a great question. We spend a lot of time, in fact, most of our time, just tracking where the market is growing and why it's growing in the ways that it is. And obviously the people that subscribe to our data, that's what they're interested in trying to understand, because that directly impacts their business. As everyone knows, we're in a time period today that we've never been in before, not just here in Texas or the United States, but all across the world. And so everybody is, I think, understanding of the flexibility needed to continue to operate your business in the most appropriate way. So we just, heads down, we've had to modify a few things, but we've been able to really I wouldn't say business as usual, because I don't think anyone can maybe claim that today. It's maybe business as unusual, but we try to keep our heads down and focused, and so we've been able to really get our information gathered, analyzed, and out. Similar to how we've done in the past. We talked to a lot of people. We've done a lot of work pre COVID-19, which really obviously hit the U.S. Significantly from a work from home perspective in like the early March to mid-March range. So from my perspective, I've been really excited about what we've been able to do and how we've been able to be flexible, and so excited to share what we've found and how the market's grown.
Sounds like you've been hard at work, David. I'd love to hear from you, about some of the overall kind of high level macro trends you've seen, both in North America and Europe, before we talk about a couple of specific markets.
Yeah, you bet. You made the point that there were several months before, in this time period that were, I would say, unaffected by, the pandemic challenges. And, I think because of that, the first quarter from both the U.S. and European side and international side as a whole is pretty strong from both the supply delivery side of things as well as the demand. And I think that's encouraging, especially because of the new world that we find ourselves in today. If you look at the larger macro trends, we saw some really good signs in the first quarter. One is when you look at the top 6 markets in the U.S. From a size perspective, Northern Virginia, Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, Phoenix, and Northern California, we saw that grow by 3%, basically the commission power that was delivered during that quarter. So, that's a good sign. Typically when supply gets delivered, it gets leased, which, for our market, especially in the US and Canada, is, consistent with other quarters in the past. The other thing I would say specifically to that supply that was delivered, there's a good portion of it that was pre-leased. And that's one of the key, from my perspective, indicators of especially larger cloud service providers that know they're going to need infrastructure quickly. That's a good sign. So from that perspective, we were encouraged. We also saw the planned power metric increase to, basically grew by 6%. And the planned power metric for us, we use to track, future projects. Now, this is not, it's very clear, just to be clear, this is not, facilities that are like now under construction or, that they're starting to do work on. These are just data center operators positioning themselves to handle future growth. And they typically have a really good look at the pipelines for enterprise users, large cloud service providers, smaller companies. And so we look at that as a really good key indicator of what future demand and growth of the market will look like. Europe continues to be strong as a whole. There's obviously some development challenges over there in markets that are really tight from a supply perspective. So, overall, it was a really strong first quarter. We're encouraged with where the market is, and we actually think moving forward that the COVID-19 challenges, and we've talked about this, Mike, on some of the other podcasts that we've done, will actually create some pretty large opportunities for the data center industry moving forward.
Okay, so let's talk about some specific markets, starting with Northern Virginia. As most people know, largest data center market in the world. One of the things we talked about at the turn of the year was, we thought there would be an increase in demand around the middle of this year. That's obviously accelerated a little bit based on our earlier expectations. We talked about international customers showing a lot more interest and doing more leasing in that market. And we talked about there being some aggressive pricing for those larger deals. So how are those things that we're kind of thinking that we're going to be coming to bear on that market 3 months ago, and how do those come to fruition over the last 3 months?
Yeah, all have happened. Your comment on the very first one maybe happened quicker than we thought. I think when we started the year, we thought that Northern Virginia and just markets as a whole would either be as strong or stronger than they were in 2019. So, certainly encouraged by those 3 stats that you mentioned. Oh, another thing I would say about Northern Virginia is at the end of 2019, we saw a number of construction deliveries hit the market and not get leased. And on the bigger scale, in Northern Virginia, that is where the largest construction projects from a data center perspective are. And so most of the projects that have been delivered over the last 2 to 3 years, larger in nature, have had a significant amount of pre-leasing. We didn't see that a lot at I would say 3Q and 4Q 2019, but we definitely saw some of those sites that had been delivered get leased in the first quarter, and that pre-leasing metric returned to similar levels that it was in other quarters. So just a very strong quarter in Northern Virginia. A lot of people look at that market as one to watch and a good indicator of how the rest of the industry is doing. And so from that perspective, a very strong start to 1Q 2020 for Northern Virginia. And I think it'll continue throughout the year based on some of the opportunities that are out there.
Yeah, it's certainly a market that everyone's got their eye on, and a bit of a bellwether for the rest of the industry. So let's talk about Phoenix, one of the markets we've also been keeping an eye on. It's been an alternative market for a lot of customers from Northern California or Los Angeles. And what I think we were thinking 3 to 6 months ago is that some of these operators were a little bit tentative in their development plans, really waiting for some demand to come to bear on the market. So how did that play out on Q1?
Yeah, Phoenix has been a market that a number of cloud service providers have deemed as the future home for projects moving forward. And so I think what that did, I would say in 2019, is attract a lot of companies, data center operators that potentially could deliver supply when it made the most sense. One of the things you have to be careful with in our industry as you track the market, how big it is, how much it can grow, is making sure you understand that when somebody says that they're in a market or they have a site planned or whatever it is, that does not mean necessarily they're moving forward with that development today. So we have seen, that's what happened in 2019. We saw a number of providers there. Not all of them started to build capacity, but we saw an increase in demand for a couple things. As I mentioned, the cloud service provider sector is going to continue to grow there. So I think some of the growth was related to that. We saw a sale leaseback happen. That's out in the news, and so that added to the capacity, and that added to some of the absorption that took place. Absorption, by the way, if you're watching this and you don't know what that word means, that just is our way to measure how much demand is in the market. So just a little news flash there, Rhett, you can put it along the screen, like right here, absorption, bing. Just kidding. So Phoenix is a market that we have seen grow in the eyes of data center developers over the last several years. And so if you get on our website, you can actually see how the planned power metric has increased, which is representative of future projects that would go in that market. So, we bullish on the Phoenix market. It ebbs and flows from a demand standpoint. Some quarters will have a period of time where there will be 20 megawatts of absorption and some 3. So it just really depends on how the demand is viewing that market at the time and what requirements are there. But certainly a strong start for Phoenix in the first part of the year.
Yeah, that's interesting. Phoenix has been, like you said, a very up and down market. If you look at the past 4 to 5 years or 3 to 4 years of historical absorption market, it's been a little bit all over the place. So good to keep an eye on that one. Next, let's talk about Northern California. It's a market, again, that has seen some activity and some interest in the last year, specifically from hyperscale users. We've also seen the vacancy in that market slowly tick downward as there's been some challenges on the development side, just from like a permitting and finding actual land to build on. So talk a little bit about Northern California, what we're seeing there.
Yeah, if you live in Northern California, you know this better than anyone, and that is it is a very tight real estate market. And that impacts, and I don't mean that just on the data center side, I mean that in the office side, the industrial side, the residential, multifamily. I mean, it's just a very compacted, tight real estate market. So because of that, it impacts the data center space and developments that take place. And so when companies are looking to, or one of the trends that we've seen over the last probably 3 to 5 years from a data center development standpoint has been campus development. So if you're trying to go through the process of planning a site, going through the permitting, the environmentals, the site work, all the things you need to do to get a site up and running, 10 to 20 megawatts is just not enough anymore. And so in order to build larger amounts of power delivery, you have to have more space to put that in. And so in a market like California or Northern California, that can be a little bit more challenging. So that's one of the reasons that we've seen the development timeline stretch in that market is just harder there than it is in a market where you have more land and it's easier to put a site on a piece of property. The hyperscale group out there, I mean, that's where a lot of them are headquartered. So there are certain demands that come from that, and I think that drives a lot of demand. We saw additional hyperscale leasing this quarter there, as well as some enterprise users that leased capacity as well. So it's one of those other markets that ebbs and flows. So if there's some quarters where Northern California has a small amount of leasing, I don't think that's reflective of interest. A lot of times it's just reflective of where the requirements are in their process and how much supply is available for that moment or available to be pre-leased down the road. That's one of those things that we keep talking about in not just major markets, but secondary markets as well. So, those were three. Mike, you start with Northern Virginia. We talked about Phoenix and then Northern California, all three that, continue to show that they are markets where users want to be.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on them. All right, moving internationally now. Small steps first here. Toronto, our neighbors to the north. It's a market that has seen a lot of interest. We've seen a lot of development there, companies who want to be near that large population center. We've also seen is a very tight, again, land market. One of the stats we report on our site is that the industrial market in Toronto has about a 1% vacancy rate, which is going to have some correlation to the data center market. So talk about Toronto. Again, it's an exciting market. Again, huge city. I think it's the fourth largest metro area in North America. So, or maybe fifth, but it's large. I think people maybe overlook it, especially in America. So talk about what's been going on in Toronto.
Yeah, you said the first thing that I think is always important to remember, especially from us here in the U.S., is how big a city Toronto is. How many people are there? How many businesses are located there? How many eyeballs, in our market? The eyeball count is important. And so Toronto represents an area that is unmatched from a Canadian perspective, the biggest city there. That being said, in 2018 and 2019, we saw a lot of growth in Montreal from a Canadian data center perspective. And, for about the last year and a half, that's really been the area where there's been a significant amount of growth focus. I think we've seen that switch a bit. I'm not saying there's not activity happening in Montreal, but I think in a market like Toronto, we are starting to see some larger growth take place there. From cloud service providers, from enterprises that want to be close to that market. So, and also just from smaller companies that have, business requirements that want to be in a certain proximity from either their headquarter location or a regional hub or something like that. So areas all around Toronto from a city perspective, are opportunities for growth. It's really wherever you can put it because it is such a tight market. There's a lot of similarities to some development challenges, like as you think of like a New York or a Northern California, maybe. So it's a market that I think is now on the radar for a number of larger end users and will be for a long time. And you're starting to see some maturity too in the data center operator community. So you put all those together and that's a market that will grow down the road.
Okay. Lastly, I want to talk about Frankfurt. So one of the European markets that we're following. I think we've said in the past, it's kind of like the Chicago or Dallas of Europe. It's not the largest, London being the largest there, but it's one of the larger players, second, third, depending on when you take your measurement. So talk a little bit about what's been going on in Frankfurt. Who are the larger players there and what kind of development we're seeing there?
Yeah, I mean, Frankfurt is a market that while if you look at the European markets compared to the US markets, it would be the second or third largest. The way I'd say it differs than the second or third largest markets here in the US is, it's starting to see a lot of demand from cloud service providers. And so this is, I don't know if we'd ever have like a hot market or one that we would put lights around or whatever, but it's very clear that, Frankfurt is an area that from a European perspective, from Germany and a European perspective, companies want to be in. There's obviously some regulatory challenges that make a city like that maybe more attractive than other cities and other countries, et cetera. And so that's just a market that's set to grow. You've got data center operators that are literally headquartered there, that know it well, that know the companies well, that have history with larger companies in that market. And so right now, I think more than ever, because of the COVID-19 stuff, if you have relationships with the data center operators that have relationships with data center users, they already have contracts with them. They have MSA agreements already set up. Like, the easy path to growth, I think, will be a big advantage in the next 12 to 24 months, just because we don't know what the future holds. And companies are trying to figure that out every day. So if a company has a challenge and you can provide a solution and an easy path to taking care of that problem, that's a big plus today, maybe bigger plus than it's ever been. And so in a market like Frankfurt, where you do have data center operators that have been there with multiple sites, it's not just the first site, it's the second site, it's the third site. We're not talking about 5 megawatts, it's 50 megawatts. That's a big advantage. So there's activity happening in London. There's activity happening in Amsterdam. We're starting to see some bigger growth in areas like Paris. Dublin is continuing to grow. But certainly Frankfurt is a market that, a number of financial institutions, cloud service providers, and enterprise users are focused on, and will be for a long time.
Well, David, great to get your perspective on those markets and just the overall national trends that we're seeing. And again, congrats to you and the research team for all the hard work and really pushing through some of the friction this quarter. Anything else before we wrap it up?
No, I'd just like to say, just a couple things. One, we've done some podcasts previously on the COVID-19 challenges. So, we would encourage you to listen to those. I think that might be Hawk Podcast 25 and 24, maybe in that order.
Yep. If
not, whatever 24 is, just enjoy. And then, the other thing I would say is, as it relates to COVID-19, there are obviously going to be some challenges with that, and as that hits the data center industry, we've highlighted some of the operational challenges that, in my opinion, the data center operators have really risen up and done a great job attacking and trying to figure out ways around it. Most of the industry, I believe, in most countries, if not all, are deemed to be essential services. So I think we've I think we've gotten over that hurdle. But it's very clear that this is the infrastructure the world is running on right now. It's what is allowing for things like this that we're doing. It's what's allowing for business meetings to take place. It's what's allowing families to connect with one another that aren't able to. And so when you put all those things together, we believe that there's going to be some pretty big opportunities for the data center space over the next 12 to 24 months that were not there before this challenge came up. So I think, just from my perspective, leading our organization, wherever you are and wherever you're listening from, obviously we hope you're healthy, you're making good decisions, and we'll be right in the middle of this, helping keep you updated. So please keep checking into the podcast stuff that we're putting out, as well as our site. We have a new blog that's coming. So in the next, I think, 60 to 90 days, that will be completely redone. You'll be seeing some great stuff with that. So we're busy, we're hard at work, and if we can do anything to be helpful, let us know.
Yeah, so if you want to get this information, a print version, datacenterhawk.com/blog will have a summary of all the things we talked about today. And then again, our insight tool is available at datacenterhawk.com/insight, where you can see, again, all the stuff we talked about and get access to that as well. Again, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you guys next time.